Hello and welcome to Food Safety Fridays, edition 14. My name is Simon Timperley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. I'm delighted to be with you here again today. Today's speaker is Elizabeth Stridham from SNAP Tactics Consulting, PVT, in Zimbabwe. We're delighted to have Elizabeth with us today. She's presented earlier in the year on hygiene and catering. It was absolutely brilliant and went down really well with all attendees. Today, Elizabeth's going to talk in more focused on preventing foodborne illness. I think I've got the title wrong, but basically we're going to be talking about bugs and nasty things and all things that can cause you illness, and looking at ways how we can mitigate that and prevent that. Which is a great topic. The presentation itself, I've seen it, and again, it's a fantastic one, and it'll be a great one to take away for you all. So welcome you all today again. I can see that we've got a healthy number of attendees, and you're all starting to use the chat and say hello to each other. Nice to see you all there, regulars. Throughout 2015, this is our 14th webinar. We've got one almost every week. We've not got one next week, but I'll tell you about that later. They're all free to attend, thanks to our lovely sponsors there, IFS, Safe Food 360, FSSC and Trace Analytics. These people support the IFSQN and help us to deliver you these presentations each week, of course, with the presenters. So obviously we thank Elizabeth today. I think I can cross over to Elizabeth. I can see Elizabeth's online. Welcome, Elizabeth. Are you with us?
Yes, Simon, I'm here. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Once again, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, we can't wait. We're looking forward to it. I did get the title wrong, I think, didn't I?
Is it? Yes, it's dangers of foodborne pathogens.
Right. Okay. Sounds really scary. But I'm sure
not you so will, much.
I'm sure you will help us through it calmly and steer us through it calmly. Yeah. So okay, while you get your presentation ready, Elizabeth, I'll do the usual and talk about next week's webinar. So we'll see you shortly. When I say next week's webinar, I mean the week after. We don't have one next week. It's my wife's birthday and I'm not allowed to run one. So there we have it. Instead, on May the 1st, Friday, May the 1st, we have Dr. Yasser Mustafa Mohammed, Quality Assurance Manager from Al Yazra Food Company in Kuwait. And Dr. Yasser will be discussing organic versus non-organic foods and highlighting specifically what the difference is between organic and non-organic. So again, a completely different subject, a brilliant potpourri of topics we're having here each week. So we look forward to that. So remember, nothing next week. A week off, but May the 1st we'll be back. But we will deliver you notification, emails, etc. So you can keep in touch on that. Okay, I can see Elizabeth's ready with the presentation. So we'll head over without further ado, and I'll be involved along the way and with the Q&A later. So, okay, over to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Basically, like Simon has said, the title of my presentation is The Dangers of Foodborne Pathogens. I'll start off with maybe just a brief personal background, just a reminder. Basically, I've got experience in chemical and microbiological testing, as well as product certification practices. And I've also got experience in auditing various management systems. And the company that I work for is involved with consulting services for quality, laboratory, and food safety management systems. So the aim of today's presentation, for those who saw my previous presentation on the Food Safety Fridays, it was entitled The Basic Hygiene Practices for the Catering Industry. So today's presentation is just more like an elaboration or an expansion of that particular presentation. So the aim for the presentation today, we are going to highlight the various food sources for foodborne pathogens, And I'm also going to expand on the illnesses which result from specific foodborne pathogens within the human body. And I'll also highlight or outline the preventive measures that we can take to avoid the effects of these foodborne pathogens. So we have a poll that we have set up. I'm interested to know whether there are any people within our audience who have suffered from, or they think that they've suffered from a foodborne illness. I don't know, Simon, is the poll up and running yet?
It is. If you, if attendees can look over to the right-hand side and the polls tab, if you click on the polls tab, you should see a question there, as Elizabeth stated. Have you ever suffered from or suspect you have suffered from a foodborne illness? And you can answer yes or no. Are we suspecting that it will be quite high, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'm expecting at least everyone to have suffered from a foodborne illness. So I'm hoping it might be 100%. But if it's not, that would be quite interesting to just to know whether, you know, what experiences people have had, maybe with regards to illnesses.
As well as answering the poll, do you want people to share a few stories in the chat, maybe?
Yes, please. If the audience can just tell us maybe the experiences that they've had with the foodborne illness, if they know of the particular type of foodborne illness that they had, and what pathogen actually caused that. I'll be interested to know that as well.
I know one major one throughout my life was when I was sort of in my 20s and I was on holiday with some friends in Spain. And you know, when you're young, you know, you go out and you have a few drinks, and then on the way home, I used to always get myself a sandwich, you know, like a chicken and lettuce and mayonnaise. It was always a chicken, lettuce and mayonnaise, and it was very satisfying. But anyway, one day I felt really, really ill, and I was ill for about 2 weeks, vomiting, diarrhea, in bed.
Shame.
I could not eat, and I actually lost about 6 or 7 kilos, which is about 1 stone in weight, and it was really knocked me back. So what do you think? What do you think caused that?
But then, unfortunately, just from the symptoms, you can only suspect which bug caused it, but you'd need maybe to get the food tested, or maybe samples of your body tested, just to identify the actual microorganism that would have caused that. But from the symptoms that you are telling us, probably it was a foodborne illness that you contracted, maybe from eating that sandwich. Either maybe the chicken was contaminated or the mayonnaise. So you'll see, maybe from my presentation, you'll see roughly what you may have been, or what you may have consumed.
And it was from like a street vendor, really. It wasn't from any high class.
The risk goes even higher for that. You know, the street vendors, it's more dangerous to buy cooked food from them.
Because there's no running water and things. Anyway, some of the things people have typed in is undercooked rice. Is one. Scallops, which is a type of seafood. What else have we got? I saw chicken before. What else have we got? Salmonella. Salmonella from a summer picnic. And giardiasis from drinking untreated mountain water. Salad from KFC. I don't know if we should say that. Oh, actually, that was a private message. Sorry. It could have been McDonald's or any other fast food vendor, not necessarily KFC. Prawns.
Yeah, that's true.
Prawns. A lot of people typing in fast food places. Egg sandwich bought on an airline. Shellfish. Shellfish. So they're typically some of the probably the high risk things. Doner kebab, E. coli from a doner meat.
And you know, comes basically even from the established food outlets.
It is an interesting one. Oyster stew on Christmas Eve. Botulism was suspected.
Okay, yeah, especially if the oysters maybe were coming from a can or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it basically. So we'll leave the poll running, but a lot of people typed in yes and also put in you know what it was. A lot of seafood and things like that.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
At least we're on the same page with most people. So So can I just continue with the presentation now?
Yeah, just continue. We'll follow up with the poll answer in the Q&A at the end now.
Okay. All right. I've lost you for a bit, Simon, but I'll just continue.
Okay.
Right. We'll start off with looking at what is a pathogen. Basically, pathogens are microorganisms that can cause disease. And by default, foodborne pathogens are basically the pathogens that utilize food as a carrier, you know, they use food to transport themselves to maybe the host organism, which can be yourself or your friends. So there are basically well over 250 foodborne pathogens that are known to cause disease in humans. So there's a whole range of pathogens out there that can cause disease. And if you don't have any microbiological tests done, you can only just suspect what type of pathogen it is that actually caused your illness. So basically, these pathogens are generally too small to be seen with the naked eye. So sometimes though, if they multiply to very large numbers, you can see signs of their presence, maybe through bubbling of stews or through maybe some slime-like substance that maybe can form on food. But then you cannot see the individual pathogen or the individual cell of that particular pathogen. So there are basically three types of foodborne illnesses that are caused by these pathogens. The first is an infection, which is basically resulting from eating contaminated food, and then that microorganisms begins to grow, or it establishes itself in your intestines and it begins to grow. It makes your intestines their home and they begin to grow. So as they multiply, you find that you develop certain symptoms of illness. And then the second type of illness is intoxication, which is whereby you eat food that has been contaminated by these organisms and they've produced certain toxins within that food. So the presence of the toxins is the one that causes illness, not necessarily the fact that the microorganism is still alive within that food. So even if maybe it has died or it's no longer viable within that food, but the fact that it has left those toxins, the toxins are the ones that then cause the illness. And then the third type of illness is the toxin-mediated infection, which is whereby the organisms get into your body through maybe contaminated food. They establish themselves in your intestines. And in addition to establishing themselves, they are also forming toxins. So it's more like a combination of the first two. Right, and then looking at the types of the pathogens, we've got bacteria as being the commonest type of foodborne pathogens. I think you remember the people that attended my first webinar session where I was talking about the hygiene practices. We mentioned that bacteria was usually the common cause of most foodborne illnesses. So bacteria are the commonest type of foodborne pathogens, and they are generally simple single-celled microorganisms. And you've got examples such as Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, Campylobacter, Clostridium botulinum, as well as maybe Staphylococcus as well. And they are larger than the viruses. And then moving on to the viruses are smaller than the bacteria. Be able to cells within your body for them to multiply and to grow in numbers. And then although they do not multiply in foods, it can take a few viral particles to make a person sick. So the presence of the viral particles, whether they have multiplied or not, it can be enough to make you sick. And they can be easily transferred from one food to another, from contaminated water to foods, and also from infected food handlers to foods. And you've got examples like hepatitis A as well as norovirus. So we will look at those viruses. For the bacteria, since there are so many of them, we will only just pick a sample of the various examples that I've given you there. So we won't look at all those. And then we also have parasites. These are basically single-celled organisms, which range from protozoa to visible worms, which are known as helminths. And you've got examples of the parasites being things like Cyclospora, Giardia, and Trichinella. And then you've got fungi. Fungi basically consists of the yeasts and molds, and usually the yeasts are generally associated with the food spoilage. I don't think there have been any yeasts that have been identified as causing any foodborne illness, but the molds have been known to produce some toxins which can result in an illness. And with the fungi, sometimes you are able to see the presence of the fungi, even without a microscope, using your naked eye. And the examples of fungi, we've got the Aspergillus species, which is basically a type of mold. Salmonella SPP basically means the Salmonella species. So the SPP, they just stands for species. So which means Salmonella is a group of bacteria. So they are certain strains, there are various strains of Salmonella, but they are capable of causing salmonellosis. So as I was saying, maybe on this slide, I was saying that the Salmonella species is basically responsible for your salmonellosis infection. And you'll find that most people can recover maybe without any treatment when they get salmonellosis. So it's not a very stringent kind of disease. So basically your immune system can take care of that salmonellosis. And these bacteria, basically, they are known to reside within the intestines of people and animals, as well as birds. And infections normally occur when you eat contaminated food that has been contaminated maybe with the fecal matter. So I was saying that the types of foods that are known to cause salmonellosis, they include raw meat, poultry, and seafood, whereby the fecal matter comes into contact with the meat during the slaughtering process. And for the seafoods, contamination normally occurs maybe when the fish is residing in contaminated water, that is water that is contaminated with salmonella. And then for the raw eggs, you'll find that some infected chickens can produce eggs that are contaminated with salmonella even before the shell is formed. So foods that utilize raw eggs, like for example, mayonnaise, they can then become contaminated with salmonella from the eggs that acquired their infection from the chickens. And then you have fruits and vegetables, which generally get contaminated when they are washed with the salmonella bacteria in it. And also contamination can occur in the kitchen when juices, for example, when juices of raw meat and poultry comes into contact with uncooked foods, such as salads. So I was saying the symptoms of salmonella, they can develop between 6 to 72 hours after exposure or after ingesting contaminated food. And it has been found that as low as 1 cell can cause salmonellosis to develop. But this depends on your age and as well as your health status. If you're of poor health, you're most likely to feel the effects of salmonellosis. And the symptoms of salmonellosis, they include nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, diarrhea, fever, headache. And you can have some additional symptoms such as chills, blood in the stool, vomiting, which can last up to 7 days. And also you may find that even if your symptoms disappear, your bowels can still be a bit abnormal for several months after. And salmonellosis usually lasts between 4 to 7 days. And if you've got the acute symptoms, those usually last between a day or two, depending, of course, on your health status and the amount of salmonella that you would have ingested, as well as the particular strain of the salmonella. And there are some salmonella strains which can cause typhoid fever. For example, Salmonella typhi. And then the preventive measures that you can take to avoid salmonellosis, they include thoroughly cooking your food, practicing good hand washing techniques, keeping raw foods separate from cooked foods, as well as refrigerating foods maybe at the correct temperature or the recommended temperatures, which are usually around 8 degrees or below. Right, then we'll move on to E. coli. E. coli basically stands for Escherichia coli. So it's another type of bacteria, and this one is a large and diverse group of bacteria that normally resides in the intestines of people and animals. So you'll find that there are some E. coli bacteria that are resident. We have them in our intestines. They are practically harmless, but then there are some strains which are pathogenic. So the ones that are harmless, they do have a beneficial effect on our body. Their presence in our intestines is actually required for our bodies to function properly. But then there are some strains that then cause illnesses. So those are the ones that normally get into food, and those are the ones that can cause our bodies to react. And you've got examples like E. coli 0157H7. And these E. coli bacteria are known to cause toxin-mediated infections. So they make your intestines their home, and they produce toxins, and you then have an illness resulting from that. Right, so the foods are known to contain, or that are known to sometimes get contaminated with E. coli. They include contaminated water and food like raw vegetables and undercooked ground beef. And other known sources include sprouts, lettuce, salami, unpasteurized milk and juice, and as well as swimming in sewage contaminated water or drinking sewage contaminated water. So you can contact some E. coli bacteria from there. The symptoms normally develop around 3 to 4 days after exposure, although some illnesses have been known to develop 1 day after, and some more than a week later after exposure to the E. coli. Same applies with the salmonella. You just need a few cells of this E. coli for the disease to manifest, or for an illness to manifest from the presence of the E. coli. So the symptoms that you will display are basically bloody diarrhea, abdominal cramps, dehydration, and in more severe cases, you can have kidney failure. And also the infants, the older people, and people with poor, maybe poor health status, they are more susceptible to the E. coli illness. And the disease from E. coli, or the illness from E. coli, is known to last between 5 to 10 days. And your preventive measures are basically following your good hygiene practices. So that's all you can do to try and avoid the E. coli effects. Right, we'll move on to Listeria. Listeria is a group of bacteria as well, and the specific bacteria type that is known to contaminate food is Listeria monocytogenes. So this bacterium causes listeriosis, which is an uncommon but potentially fatal illness. So you can get Listeria bacteria residing in food processing factories for years, and as they make residence in the factory, they can be contaminated. They can be contaminating food products, and you'll find that these types of bacteria, they survive food processing technologies that consist maybe on acids or salty conditions. And also you'll find that this type of bacteria can also survive and can still multiply at low temperatures. So it actually poses a risk for refrigerated foods. The sources of Listeria, they include raw foods such as uncooked meats and vegetables. And you also have foods that become contaminated after cooking or processing. For example, soft cheeses, processed meats such as hot dogs and deli meat, as well as smoked seafood. And you also have unpasteurized milk and cheeses and foods that are made from unpasteurized milk. So those are the sources of Listeria that have been identified as causing the listeriosis that has been observed in certain individuals. And then the symptoms normally develop a few days after eating contaminated food, but in some cases, it may take as long as 2 months before the first signs and symptoms of infection begin to show. As the case for the other types of bacteria, you just need a couple of cells of Listeria in your system for an illness to develop. And the duration of the illness, it varies. Basically, it can last for a few days. It can last up to a couple of weeks. The symptoms, they consist of high fever, severe headache, neck stiffness, and nausea. And you can have unborn babies contracting a listeria infection through the placenta from their mother. And the disease or the illness has been known to cause miscarriages and stillbirths. And when the infection spreads through the bloodstream to the nervous system, which includes the brain, you can have other illnesses or potentially fatal problems developing, like, for example, meningitis and other health problems. So to prevent listeria, it's recommended that you avoid unpasteurized milk, or you eat, and also you avoid eating cheeses and foods that have been made with unpasteurized milk. You're required to follow the cooking instructions on the various types of foods that you're consuming. You need to wash your fruits and vegetables thoroughly, and you need to prevent cross-contamination of your cooked foods with your raw foods. And also the washing of hands and your other utensils is also recommended, especially if these come in contact with raw foods. Right, we'll move on to Campylobacter. It's still another type of bacteria. This one causes Campylobacteriosis, which is also an infection, and it's from a group of bacteria that are known as Campylobacter. So the Campylobacter results from eating raw or undercooked poultry meat, or from cross-contamination of foods with these types of meats. And infants are known to get infected through the handling of poultry packages in shopping carts. And also outbreaks have been identified from unpasteurized milk as well as contaminated water. And the infection normally develops between 2 to 5 days after infection. And a small number of these organisms can cause illness. And it has been found that at least a drop of juice from raw chicken meat can also cause an infection. So the symptoms that you have from Campylobacteriosis include diarrhea, cramping, abdominal pain, and fever. And the diarrhea can be bloody, and it can be accompanied by nausea and vomiting. However, in some people, they may be lucky enough not to display any symptoms. So in rare situations, if you have maybe a long-term infection, you can have some complications developing, such as maybe arthritis, as well as a rare disease, which is known as Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is basically whereby your body's immune system begins to attack your nervous system. So you can have maybe damage on your nerves. And this illness can last for up to a week. To prevent Campylobacteriosis, you need to practice the good hygiene practices that are recommended, which basically include avoiding cross-contamination of uncooked items with raw meat and poultry products, thoroughly cooking your food, ensuring that the milk that you consume is pasteurized, as well as the dairy products are made from pasteurized milk, as well as disinfecting your water supply. So basically, those are the preventative measures that you can take for Campylobacteriosis. Then we'll move on to another type of bacterium, which is Clostridium botulinum. This one basically is known to produce a toxin, a nerve toxin, which causes a paralytic illness, which is known as botulism. So the other types of strains of Clostridium that are known to produce this toxin as well, they include Clostridium bactericum as well as Clostridium barati. So the toxin is basically found in foods. If the food is contaminated with the Clostridium species, these bacteria will produce the toxin. And when you ingest the food that's got this toxin, then you can become ill. So it's known that most forms of the botulism, they are generally fatal, and they're considered to be medical emergencies, as many people can get poisoned by consuming contaminated food. So the sources of Clostridium botulinum, or the sources of the toxin that causes botulism, it's known that home canned foods with low acid content, such as canned asparagus, green beans, beets, and corn. So if you consume the home canned foods, then you can acquire that toxin. And other incidences have been observed from improper handling during manufacture of foods, or during retail, or through handling by consumers. And these examples have included chopped garlic in oil, canned cheese sauce, chili peppers, tomatoes, carrot juice, as well as baked potatoes wrapped in foil. So the disease or the illness normally results 18 to 36 hours after consuming the toxin, but occurrence as early as 6 hours or as late as 10 days has been observed. And just a few nanograms of this toxin is enough to cause illness. And also, if you're lucky, sometimes the canned foods, they can display the presence of maybe the botulinum or the Clostridium bacteria, or the presence of the toxin through maybe you find that the can begins to swell. But in some cases, the can doesn't swell. But in cases where the cans do swell, it's recommended that you are not to consume that food from a swelled can. And the duration of the illness is basically variable, and it's usually fatal. So if you acquire the botulinum toxin, you are most likely to die from it. And symptoms of the poisoning include double vision, blurred vision, drooping eyelids, slurred speech, difficulty swallowing and breathing, dry mouth, nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, paralysis, and muscle weakness. And in infants that have acquired the toxin, they appear lethargic, they feed poorly, they are constipated and have a weak cry and poor muscle tone. And you find that these symptoms are basically as a result of the muscle paralysis. The symptoms that I've just read out, as well as the ones for the infants, they're basically as a result of muscle paralysis, because the botulinum toxin is known to cause muscle paralysis. So maybe blurred vision, drooping eyelids, difficulty in breathing, as well as maybe the infants feeding poorly and having a weak cry and poor muscle tone. Okay, right. So I'll move on to the prevention measures that you can take to prevent yourself from acquiring this toxin. The first is basically, if you're going to be doing any home canning, it's recommended that you follow the appropriate canning instructions, as well as the good hygiene requirements. And also recommended that you boil canned foods for 10 minutes before consuming them. That is whether it's food from homemade cans or from store-bought cans. Still with me, Simon?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So basically, those are the types of bacteria that are known to cause certain types of foodborne illness. So there are quite a number. So that's just a sample, just to give you a feel of what types of illness can result from the various types of bacteria. So we'll move on to the viruses, whereby I mentioned that hepatitis A is one of the viruses that can cause foodborne illness. So hepatitis A is basically a liver disease that results from the hepatitis A virus, and it can range in severity from a mild illness, which can last a few weeks, to a severe illness, which can last a couple of months. So it's usually spread by maybe consuming contaminated food and drinks, as well as maybe handling objects which are contaminated with the virus. So you can maybe, from the handling, you can transfer the virus from your hands to your food. And the food and drinks that have been associated with hepatitis A include fruits, vegetables, shellfish, ice, and water. However, chlorination is known to kill the virus. So if you've got a contaminated water supply, you can just chlorinate, and that should be enough to kill the virus. Right? And then contamination can also occur from an infected person when they do not wash their hands properly after going to the bathroom, and they come and they touch food or objects associated with food. And then the onset of the symptoms is usually about 2 to 4 weeks after consumption of contaminated food or water. And as low as 10 to 100 viral particles can be enough to cause hepatitis A. And some people may not display any symptoms of this hepatitis A illness, but in cases where the symptoms do manifest themselves, you can have things like fever, fatigue, loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, maybe a dark-colored urine, clay-colored bowel movements, joint pains, as well as jaundice, which is your yellowing of the eyes or the skin. And in some cases, hepatitis A has been known to cause liver failure, as well as death. So the mild, the illness basically is usually mild, and it can go away after a week or two, but in some cases it can last up to 6 months in some people. So it's a very dangerous illness to acquire, because sometimes you may not even know that you have it and it's in your system for the next 6 months. However, the preventive measures are usually your basic good hygiene practices can be enough just to prevent maybe individuals from acquiring hepatitis A. Then we'll move on to norovirus. So this is another contagious virus that can affect anyone, and infection usually results from contaminated food and water, or from an infected person, or from touching contaminated surfaces. So foods that have normally been involved with the outbreaks of norovirus, they include your leafy green vegetables such as lettuce, your fruits, meats and salads which have been prepared by an infected person. The virus normally is from contaminated water, so the fish will be residing in contaminated water that has been contaminated with norovirus. And you've got any other types of foods which are served raw or handled after being cooked. They can also get contaminated with the virus. You remember I mentioned that an infected person can transmit the virus, so if they handle other types of food which are normally served raw, they can also transmit that virus. So symptoms normally develop between 1 to 2 days after eating contaminated food, but the symptoms can start to manifest in as few as 12 hours. And same with the hepatitis A, the infective dose is thought to be between 1 to 10 viral particles, and your symptoms will include inflammation of the stomach or intestines or both, and this can lead to stomach pain, nausea, diarrhea, and vomiting. And one of the first signs of the illness is explosive or projectile vomiting, which is also used as a way to characterize that particular disease. So if you have experienced any explosive vomiting, you're most likely to have been infected with norovirus. So this illness can last between 1 to 3 days. So trichinella is basically a species of worm which causes illness through its larva. So the illness that can result from trichinella larva is trichinellosis or trichinosis. So you consume trichinella larva, and this larva matures into adult worms in your intestine over a period of several weeks. And then these worms then produce more larvae within your body. So the symptoms of this illness include nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, fatigue, fever, abdominal discomfort. And these are usually the first symptoms that you start to display. But then there are a second set of symptoms, which include headaches, fevers, chills, coughs, swelling of the eyes and face, aching joints and muscle pains, itchy skin, diarrhea, and constipation. So if you have a heavy infection, you can also have difficulty in coordinating movements, as well as maybe developing heart and breathing problems. And in severe cases, death can also result. So for the mild or moderate infections, your symptoms can subside within a couple of months, but you may have fatigue, weakness, and muscle pain and diarrhea lasting for some more months to come. And then the trichinella or the trichinella larva, they can also cause complications, because as they multiply, or as the adults produce more larvae, these larvae will migrate through your body, and these larvae will die in various organs of your body. So you're likely to have invasion of heart, brain, or lung tissue. Prevention of trichinella illness is recommended that you cook your pork and your wild game meat thoroughly. And if you're going to use, or if you're going to grind it, make sure that you wash your grinders thoroughly. And also, if you're going to be grinding a number of meat types, just make sure that your pork and your wild game is ground last, to prevent maybe contaminating other food types as well, or other meat types as well. Are you with me, Simon?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So I'm almost towards the end. I'm now talking about the fungi. We said that the fungi basically consist of the yeasts and the molds, and the yeasts are usually associated with food spoilage and not foodborne illness. But then on the mold side, there has been some toxigenic fungi that have been identified, such as Aspergillus, Penicillium, and Fusarium species. So these fungi or molds, they are known to produce mycotoxins, which have been found in grain and nut crops, as well as in celery, grape juice, apples, and other produce. And they can also occur in milk, meat, and other products as a result of animals consuming mycotoxin-contaminated feeds. So these mycotoxins have been implicated as causative agents of foodborne intoxication, as well as also maybe initiating some types of cancers. So they are known to be carcinogenic. So a type of fungus or molds that is known to produce a toxin called aflatoxin. Those molds are known as the Aspergillus species. And you've got strains like Aspergillus flavus, Aspergillus parasiticus, and these are they produce aflatoxins. And aflatoxins, basically, if you consume them, you can have an illness like aflatoxicosis. So acute aflatoxicosis is characterized by vomiting, abdominal pain, pulmonary edema, convulsions, coma, and death, with cerebral edema and fat involvement of the liver, kidney, and the heart. So usually, if you see any food that has got mold growth, even if it's just a section of the food that has got molds, it's recommended that you throw that food away, because the molds are known to produce roots that may go deep into the areas which are not even showing signs of presence of mold. So it's not recommended that you just cut off the mold that you're seeing and then you eat the rest of the food. It's best just to throw out everything. Right. Basically, those are some of the pathogens that are known to cause various food types of illnesses. But like I said, you can see these individual pathogens or microorganisms using the naked eye. So it will be difficult for you to identify food that is contaminated with these microorganisms. So because the food is not going to look bad, it's not going to taste bad, and sometimes it doesn't even smell bad. So the food may be perfectly normal, but it may have presence of the pathogens. Like I said, that for some types of microorganisms, just the presence of one cell can be enough to cause an illness. So it is impossible to determine whether the food is contaminated with pathogenic organisms without microbial testing. So to avoid potential problems in foods, you have to take measures to control or to eliminate these microorganisms. So you find that different types of pathogens are risky in different ways. So a safety step that you may have for one type of pathogen may not be effective against another type. But in general, just to lower the risk of maybe contracting some illnesses from these pathogens, it's recommended that you practice the good hygienic practices, which include washing of your hands before handling food, as well as after handling different types of foods, and also thoroughly washing your raw foods and your vegetables, and cooking food to its proper temperatures to kill these pathogens, and also keeping raw food separate from cooked food, as well as using the appropriate refrigeration temperature. So basically, in summary, consumption of contaminated foods results in illnesses with various types of symptoms such as fever, stomach upsets, and diarrhea. And you also get flu-like symptoms. An illness from eating contaminated food. And you have complications that may arise from these illnesses, which can result in more serious diseases as well as death. And due to the fact that some organisms or microorganisms have got long onset periods, it also poses a factor in identifying some of these foodborne illnesses. So like, if you remember, there's one that I mentioned that it only develops, I think, a week to a month later. So you likely not, most likely not to associate that illness from a particular type of food that you would have eaten a month before. Yeah, so basically prevention of these illnesses can be achieved through practicing basic food hygiene techniques. So basically that's my presentation for today. thank you very much for maybe making it through the whole presentation.
Okay, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. I'm here, Elizabeth. Thanks very much for that. Thanks for struggling on through difficult circumstances. It's very frustrating for you trying to do the presentation with the technology letting us down. But we struggled on. I must say I'm feeling quite ill now. You know, I've got dry mouth and sweating and sweating.
Okay, I'm sure it's just the heat, Simon.
Well, it's not the heat in England, I can assure you of that. I ate the other day. I had a baked potato and I saved it in tin foil, in aluminium foil. Okay. And I didn't realize that was potentially a cause of botulism.
Yes, it is actually.
And botulism can kill you.
Yeah, but you should be showing signs of muscle paralysis, Simon.
I am, yeah.
So maybe you need to take yourself to a health department or something.
Well, I told you the other day, well, sorry, before we started, that I had to have a nap before we started today. So I'm really concerned now.
Yeah.
You've really put the fear of God in me.
I'm sure it's not been though.
Anyway, let's get on with the thanks. Like I say, thanks very much for that. And yeah, also to attendees, obviously, it is frustrating when you can just see the red car and it's going on and off. But it is very difficult. And remember, after this, you will get the slides, and I'll try and edit the video the best I can. So we do our best for you, and I think most attendees appreciate that. So let's have some Q&A. I mean, I must say there has been a lot of discussion to and fro between attendees during your presentation, asking all sorts of things. One was about when you talked about unpasteurized cheese and milk, and that you know it's a risk to pregnant women. And there was also talking about in their country, are they warned about that? And so that was a good discussion. But so I've got a question from Lily. I did miss a good portion of the presentation due to poor connectivity, but I did notice that when presented each pathogen, there was a short note on where they are commonly present. But what is the most prevalent in spices? Can you answer that, Elizabeth? Are you there, Elizabeth? What is the most prevalent, let's say, pathogen in spices?
Pathogen in spices. Usually, I think in spices, you're most likely to have some types of fungi. I should think so, because it's a dried food, and you can have spores maybe of some fungi as well as some types of bacteria. So like I said, you have well over 250 microorganisms that have been identified and known to cause food illness. So I think if you really need to know what are the risks from spices, you'd need to really do some research on that. Specific, you know, I'm sure there's been some tests that have been done on spices. Yeah. But offhand, I can't really say. But I'm sure that if there is any contamination, it's most likely to be some kind of spores of some sort, because the water activity is low, so you won't really have viable organisms resident in spices.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And another question, well, another discussion, a sort of debate, was about storage temperatures of themselves, you know, in different areas. I can't remember what you said was the safe storage temperature. What is that in?
Basically, if you're going to refrigerate food, usually the recommended temperature is below 8 degrees Celsius. But I found that it tends to vary depending on the country. So yeah, I think
in Europe, I think it's 7 degrees, and there was also mention of 4 degrees as well. I mean,
Yeah, and even 5 in some parts.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the best thing is just keep the temperature as low as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, someone's put chocolate is the perfect food, no mold. No mold, but I think salmonella in chocolate, I think.
Yeah, I think chocolate is actually, it has got some risks with some types of microorganisms. I can't say offhand, but I know it does have some risks.
Yeah, a few people have typed in about spices, actually. Ingrid and Anna have said Bacillus cereus spores
Okay,
would be
yeah,
the potential one in that.
yeah.
So any specific questions from any of the attendees? I'm just looking. If you have, please type in now.
Okay.
By the way, the poll, although quite a few people couldn't answer it, it did come out at 94%.
94%.
From what I saw, yeah.
Okay,
So that's,
all right, yeah.
I mean, perhaps those people that answered no, perhaps didn't know or didn't associate it with a particular food, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm sure at least all of us at some point in time we have suffered from something foodborne.
Yeah. Telmo is typing in, Elizabeth, you should consider including biotoxins present in shellfish such as ASP, NSP, lipophilic toxins. I have no idea what Telmo's on about. I think maybe he's talking about extending the presentation. NASA's saying, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just saying that I think probably the biotoxins that he's talking about, probably they are coming from the shellfish, because there are some fish that produce toxins. Maybe that's what. Maybe that's what he's referring to.
I think so. Yeah. NASA's saying, I wonder if there is a difference between salmonella that causes food poisoning and that causes animal salmonellosis. Is there a difference between the food poisoning and animal salmonellosis?
Okay. I think basically, like animals and humans, we are alike in terms of anatomy and stuff. So I think the salmon, because we are getting the salmonella from animals anyway. So
yeah. So obviously,
probably it's the same.
Somebody's typed in Corrado's guest to write down an analysis plan for fresh and canned truffles. Which pathogens would you search for canned truffles?
Okay. Obviously, usually the canned stuff is usually Clostridium. So you want to maybe check for Clostridium in the canned truffles. Yeah.
It's difficult because I think something like that, fresh and canned truffles, it's quite it's not a common food. I think you need to do some research on that, wouldn't you, really?
Yeah. I don't think we've got truffles in Zimbabwe.
No, I mean, truffles can be like chocolate things, chocolate truffles, but I think this is more truffles that grow, I think in the ground. I think they're like a speciality.
Like some type of mushroom.
Yeah, like some sort of speciality food like that, which obviously it's not some. Is botulinic toxin, is it thermoresistant?
I think it does break down with heat because there wouldn't be a recommendation to heat your food for at least 10 minutes. So I think it probably can break down when exposed to heat.
Yeah. Somebody asked before as well, Elizabeth. When you were talking about the one that's in pork, was it
the trichinella?
Trichinella. Somebody did ask, if you freeze food, will that kill that, basically?
I don't think so. Because it's lava, so I think the lava they'll just slow down in maturing, but they're most likely to remain alive.
Right, and then when the conditions are right, then they come back, spring out and attack you.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Any known pathogens in coconut sugar?
Coconut sugar, not to my knowledge. I don't even know what coconut sugar is. What is that?
No, no idea. I know what a coconut is, and I know what sugar
Yeah,
is. I thought you get like coconut meat, sort of the meat part, and also the
yeah,
milk. The milk,
yeah,
but maybe the sugar is something that's refined from the coconut milk or the beads
yeah,
of that. I
yeah,
really don't know.
yeah.
Anyway, the
But
quite,
yeah.
yeah, go on. Sorry, Elizabeth.
I just wanted to re-emphasize that I mentioned that there are over 250, pathogenic organisms that have been identified. So maybe if people want to know the specifics on a particular type of food, maybe you might need to do a little bit of research on that for you to get the specifics. Because the ones that I was just mentioning are the common types of bacteria that are normally identified in most foods. So
Yeah,
for the specifics in the individual types of organisms, you might need to do a little bit of research on that.
yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, I
Yeah.
think what we'll do is we'll end it there, Elizabeth, and because we're at 10 past the hour, we'll end it there.
Okay.
So thank you very much for your input. It was a great presentation, and I'm sure when the attendees get the actual PowerPoint as well, they'll see that the effort and the detail and the actual content is very, very useful as well. So what we'll do is I'll edit the recording, and we'll see how that comes out. Hopefully that should come out okay. But thanks very much for today,
Okay.
Elizabeth.
All right. Thank you, Simon, for having me.
Yeah.
And thank you to everyone for attending once again.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. That was great. I have opened up the certificate in the sidebar. If you look in the Poppins tab, you should be able to see the certificate. If you cannot, which is highly likely, knowing how temperamental this software is, if you cannot see that, you will receive the certificate video and the PowerPoint presentation slides all via an email that I'll send out in a couple of days. So don't worry if you can't get it now, you will get it in due course. We'll copy all of the comments and we'll post them on the forum, and where there are questions, we'll try and follow up with links and answers to those questions. So thanks for attending. Thanks to Elizabeth for today. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time for the presentation on the difference between organic and non-organic foods, but we'll send you an email about that. Okay, so thanks for attending. Have a lovely Friday, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care.